In September 2023, something even more strange than normal was happening on the Las Vegas Strip.
There was a lot of disruption, customers in the hotels taking to social media. So for example, at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, saying that the slot machines weren't working. There were issues with room key cards, that the ATMs were out of order, that when they were winning on the casinos, it was very difficult to cash out. There were huge queues at check-in because MGM was taken offline.
You're listening to Phishing for Trouble from ISMS.online. I'm Rebecca Harper.
And I'm David Holloway. And this time, we're exploring how social engineering puts people at the front line of cybersecurity.
Back to Vegas now, where what happens is supposed to stay there, just not in this case. Dr. Jessica Barker works with organisations around the world on cybersecurity awareness, behaviour and culture. She's co-founder of Cygenta, which works with people to build more positive and proactive security cultures. And she lives in Las Vegas, where she was witness to an enormous cyber attack last year.
I was shopping in an antique store, about the most offline place you can imagine, in a place like Las Vegas, and the people running the store, I overheard them having a conversation about it. Everybody in the city was talking about it. Of course, it made headlines around the world. MGM owns over half of the Las Vegas Strip, and it's the largest employer in the state of Nevada in the United States. MGM Grand is the largest hotel in the world. There are around 70,000 people going through MGM Grand Hotel every day. So just slightly less people than go through Disneyland in LA every day. So just to paint a picture of how huge that is.
Beyond Vegas, more than 30 hotels and casinos around the world experienced issues too. So what was happening?
It appears that what happened is they were the victim of a ransomware attack, which reportedly began with voice phishing.
Voice phishing, or vishing, is a social engineering attack over the phone. Attackers had duped MGM's help desk by posing as an employee who'd forgotten their password. They shared some personal information, and their password was reset. By the time the employee received notification that their password had been reset, the hackers were already into the system, and it was too late.
MGM, I don't believe, released confirmation of this, but the hacking group Scattered Spider appear to have claimed the attack, and they said that they initially got their foot in the door through online reconnaissance, doing that online research and social engineering. Apparently, they used LinkedIn to find employees of MGM, then called the MGM IT help desk, impersonating one of those employees. And it seems that they then, once they were in the network, they were able to infect that MGM network with ransomware. So stealing and encrypting MGM data.
That's data such as contact details, gender, date of birth, and driver's license numbers from some customers, in addition to some social security and passport numbers. And whilst there isn't evidence this was used for further fraud, the resorts were held to ransom over it.
And as we have seen in so many cases over the last few years, then demanding a payment in cryptocurrency and saying that they would release the data. So it shows how ransomware has evolved from, we're locking up the data, you need to pay us in cryptocurrency for you to get the data back. Now it's this extortion model of, we have the data and you need to pay us to keep it secret and to not expose it to the world. And MGM didn't give in to their demands, and it took over 10 days for operations to return to normal. And in the first week of the incident, MGM's share price dropped, I think, by 6%. So it had a huge impact. Everybody, being in Las Vegas at that time, everybody was talking about it. And in their SEC filing, MGM said they identified the attack, and is often the case, they had to shut down their own systems to prevent the attackers from getting further into the network and accessing financial information of their customers. And they said they have estimated that it probably would cost them, has cost them about $100 million in profit.
$100 million. The numbers are eye-watering. Let's first say that MGM haven't disclosed all the details of how the attack happened. But what we do know is that although hackers got their foot in the door through a simple phishing attack, the ransomware and techniques they added afterwards were incredibly sophisticated. Now, social engineering attacks, this isn't the first one that we've seen in recent years, is it? An attack being used to access a big company.
No, you're absolutely right. One really notable example is Uber, where attackers actually successfully gained access through social engineering, exploiting human vulnerabilities instead of technical ones to gain access. In the Uber case, the attackers actually impersonated employees to trick Uber's internal help desk, again, gaining credentials and later using those to navigate the company's system. So it was very similar to MGM. They used information from social media profiles and company systems to build sort of really believable stories demonstrating they were Uber employees. And it just proves how convincing social engineering techniques can be at targeting that sort of human behavior to gain access to systems.
I think that's absolutely right. And here we're talking about big companies, right? Uber, MGM, some of the most recognizable brands in the world. And of course, these companies have sophisticated and well-organized security infrastructure and setups. But in both cases, it's been social engineering, so exploiting human behavior, like you say, to gain access and almost bypass those advanced systems to gain access to information. And I think people might think, well, does that really happen? And of course, it does. It happens more often than you might think. This is preying on instinctive human behavior, urgency, fear, trust, these types of things to convince people to take an action, which actually is going to lead to, potentially terrible consequences for that company.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was another incident with Uber where an attacker repeatedly sent multi-factor authentication requests to an Uber employee until that employee just decided to accept the prompt in the text that they were getting and then used that to access Uber's VPN. So it is very much just using that human desire to want to do the right thing and trust the system and trust the process to manipulate them to do the behavior that the attacker wants them to do.
Exactly. And that one was MFA fatigue, I think. Yeah. And I read about it, kind of like keep on sending and eventually they'll relent. Yeah, absolutely. They'll give in and think that it must be something legitimate. And I think one of the things about that Uber example is that after the employee had taken that action and revealed the details, I think quite quickly after that, they alerted their own internal security team. I think they sort of sat back for a minute when you were able to come out of that moment of urgency, where you haven't been thinking straight, you've been kind of forced into thinking too fast, taking rash decisions, and actually thought, I shouldn't have done that. And then taking the right step, contacting the internal security team, the IT team, and letting them know early. So I think they were able to mitigate most of the impact of this attack. And that's the right thing to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is 100% what you should do. I think to a degree, I read in one report that the attackers actually briefly took over Uber's Slack channel to announce the hack, which is a very sort of overt thing for a hacker to do. But that also then led to sort of that temporary shutdown of internal tools and disrupting workflows to try and prevent them from getting further access. But when you're talking about the response, the fact that the employee felt comfortable enough and confident enough to go and report it, and like you say, tell them, I've done this thing, I actually think that wasn't the right thing to do, it means that the culture must have been so positive around security within Uber at that time that that person felt comfortable to do that so that the right actions could then be taken to mitigate the risk of what was happening.
So important that cybersecurity first culture, it really can be your first line of defense. And then even if that first line is breached, there's still the culture that says, right, shouldn't have done that. Now I'm going to take a good next step and alert the relevant people to it. So I think that no shame, no blame culture within cybersecurity, because I guess there are instances where people have done the training, done the awareness course, you sort of feel like I should have known. Now I don't want to reveal that mistake, but actually it's the reverse of that, isn't it? Everyone makes mistakes. It happens,
We're human.
Right.
Everyone makes mistakes. So having the confidence to go and say, hey, I've done this and I think that was wrong, so commendable that they'd created that culture that that person felt comfortable doing that.
And I think there was much else commendable about the responses in both of these instances, for MGM and for Uber. Do you want to kind of touch on that?
Yeah. So when MGM sort of detected the ransomware attack, they acted really quickly. They took affected systems offline to prevent attackers from accessing more sensitive data. And although the shutdown was very disruptive, it was absolutely the right thing to do to limit the ransomware's spread and prevent sort of deeper compromises. And both MGM and Uber were very transparent in their disclosures. So MGM actually estimating significant financial impacts in its SEC filing in the US, really demonstrating that accountability and transparency in handling the incident, which is what we need to happen so that everyone can then learn and defend against similar incidences, and everyone feels they can trust that they will do the right thing by their customers, the data that they hold.
And I think, being able to react fast when an incident is unfolding, that without any doubt is enabled by being ready for it, having a plan, for it. It's going to be very difficult to react fast in that moment when you haven't done the thinking beforehand, so your level of preparedness, how ready you are for this, how well tested your plans are, that's when that really counts.
Absolutely. If you have had a plan, you've tested the plan, you've practiced the plan, there's no panic when something like this happens. It's okay, let's implement that plan. That's the best situation you could find yourself in, because let's be honest, cyber criminals get more creative. And so even with the best plan in the world, there's still a chance you're going to be compromised or suffer an incident. And when it comes to human behavior, the likelihood sadly is slightly higher because, like you say, humans want to do the right thing, want to make sure that they're doing the best for their company, their employee, etc. So you have to be really, really prepared.
And I think, like you said, reacting fast, being prepared, clear communication, both internally and externally. Also, if you have to make any other bodies aware from a regulatory perspective, make sure that you're always on the front foot with that, showing good support and assistance to those people impacted. And then I think crucially, you want to get things fixed. You want to get it resolved. But then such an important step is reviewing what's happened and how do you make it better. And this is continuous improvement, right? This is the bedrock of ISO 27001.
Absolutely. And I think in the Uber instance, they actually engaged with an external security expert to analyze the impact of the breach afterwards and see what they could learn and how they might be able to improve their security practices, which is so important. I think it's a step so many businesses often forget because you get so entrenched in just getting back to the day-to-day. But if you can really investigate it and look at it and examine it and understand how it happened, you can put additional protections in place to help prevent it from happening again. And
of course, there's no final destination in all this kind of stuff. This is an ongoing process now, an ongoing journey for all businesses. Cybercrime and cyber threat, these things aren't going away. So that continuous improvement piece, that's key to how you can continue to stay up to date with those threats as they change. So both MGM and Uber had much to commend in their response. Could they have done some stuff differently, do you think?
I think there's always things you could have done differently and small things you could have done to improve your ability to manage risks like that. We've talked about some of these before, but strengthening your access controls, making sure you have multi-factor authentication for all systems, regardless of whether it's an old system or a new system, put multi-factor authentication on it. It's such a simple step. It might feel annoying sometimes, and obviously it is compromisable. We saw that with Uber, but having it is better than not having it. But probably one of the biggest ones in this incident would have been training. Your people are your first line of defense, especially supporting people like help desk staff who are often getting phone calls from lots of people with lots of different types of problems, both internal and external potentially. So helping them better recognize and respond to social engineering tactics would have been such a good thing for them to have gone through. I'm not saying it would have prevented it, but at least having that knowledge might have limited the impact of an incident like this. We've got some fantastic guests on this episode to help us unpack how social engineering's rapid evolution means people and organisations are continually at risk from cyber attacks. But on the flip side, they're sharing their wise words on how we can understand the threats, make some changes, and feel confident when online.
It's just not worth not hearing what they've got to say.
Javvad Malik is the lead security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. He explained what we mean by social engineering and who can be a victim to it.
Social engineering it's basically a con or a scam. Basically, that's all it means. It's like, how do you trick someone into doing something that's not in their best interest? It's kind of like what we've seen tricksters and fraudsters do for many years over time. You say, it's like the old, I'm the wallet inspector in the playground, and you take someone's wallet and then you run off. Now everything's contactless. It's just interesting that now the very technology that we use to be very productive and very useful and connect with people is the same technology that criminals are using. So when we say social engineering, it's cons that are typically perpetrated using technology or through the medium of technology that we're all very used to. Anyone could be attacked, targeted. So many of you may have received a phone call from someone saying, hello, I'm calling from Microsoft, there's a virus on your computer, go on there and do this, that, the other. By now, most of us are kind of aware that these are scams, but some people fall for them. Other more damaging ones are ones where they claim to be from your pension provider, saying, oh, you need to transfer your entire pension pot, and that could be like hundreds of thousands of pounds in some cases, where people have gotten worried and they've transferred all of their money somewhere else and lost it all. On an organizational level, it happens all the time. So, many times organizations are targeted. Their accounts department might be targeted, saying, hey, we're one of your trusted partners, okay, or a supplier of yours, yes. We're just changing banks, so now please update the bank account details with this. And so when the next payment cycle goes through, all the money goes there. We've seen HR departments being attacked like this, with people claiming to be staff saying, I've updated my bank details, can you please send my paycheck to this new bank account now? And there's all sorts of things that go on, but all of it involves basically tricking someone into doing something.
Not a day goes by without us hearing stories of social engineering catching people out. So why does it continue to work so well for hackers? Jess explained.
We can turn to behavioral economics and understand that what they do is they use techniques like fear, like time pressure, urgency, posing as authority, preying on our sympathy, all of these techniques which we know will push us from a slower way of thinking into a quicker way of thinking, clouding our judgment so that we act before we think. And that's what they're taking advantage of. And it's become such an integral part of most cyber attacks. And really, we see social engineering being carried out over multiple different channels. It's not just phishing emails, it's any way really in which we communicate. And what I always say is we're all human. So the right phish, the right social engineering technique at the wrong time can catch anyone. Because our awareness raising and our behavioral change programs, our culture change programs, because of their success, cyber criminals have become more sophisticated as well. So it's this cat and mouse game where it's good to raise awareness. It certainly does have an impact, but unfortunately, attackers are always going to look to evolve and find the next stage to their attacks too.
Javvad's been working in cybersecurity his whole career. He says it's the jargon and lack of consumer understanding around technology that can mean we're most vulnerable to attacks.
The more I spent time in the industry and the more I started blogging or getting involved in podcasts or videos, I realized how much of a gap there was between when you're working in the industry and what you think is normal to what the average consumer or user or people within industry, even people who work in technology. And it's almost like we speak our own language. We talk about threats and vulnerabilities and threat actors and all these kinds of things that, for the average person, it's like, it doesn't mean anything. It's like you might as well, be speaking Klingon. So that's when I thought, okay, these are some of the things that criminals actually take advantage of to trick us. they'll send you a message saying, oh, there's a new update and vulnerability and patch your system now. And people are like, I just don't know. It pops up and I click OK every single time. That's the mentality of everyone.
And our emotional relationships with organizations can also leave us open to exploitation by attackers, making social engineering one of the most common ways attackers are able to gain access to networks, to deploy malware, viruses, or to access data.
There's kind of like a few different factors at play here. So one is the trust that you have with, say, like your bank. You trust your bank. A text message comes from your bank, you're going to trust it. But also, as organizations, we've made it quite difficult for people to differentiate what's a legitimate piece of communication we send out and what comes from a criminal. So for many years, organizations would send out an email or a text to people and say, there's an issue with your account, click here and go and reset your password. So we conditioned people to trust the links and trust the communication that came through. So criminals started sending emails and text messages saying, oh, there's an issue with your account, click here. So there's that trust built up, and then there's the actual behavior that we've instilled in people. Now you're seeing actually organizations move away from that, and they say, like, there's an issue with your account, go and log on to your account using the website that you know, don't click on a link. We see examples of this so frequently, and lots of well-known companies, whenever there's a breach, you can normally tie it down to some form of human element in there. An interesting one recently was Reddit, where one of their admins, they were logging onto a system and they got a text message from HR saying, we need you to give us your multi-factor authentication code to let you know about your latest like pay slip or something like that. It was crafted in a way that got someone thinking, there's an issue with my pay or what have you. And even though we tell everyone all the time, don't give your multi-factor authentication code to anyone, but again, because it instilled that feeling of, oops, something, I might not get paid this month. So it's an emotional reaction and it comes on your phone. They ended up giving their code. And because of that, criminals were able to log into their account, and they were an admin. So it was pretty high profile.
Increasingly sophisticated technology is making social engineering attacks harder to spot. Troy Hunt is founder of the Data Breach Notification Service. Have I been pwned? He's investigated thousands of different data breaches.
I think we've got to think about why social engineering is successful. And it's successful because we convince people of a narrative and we encourage them to do things that they wouldn't normally do. It's literally hacking the humans to behave in ways that they're not pre-programmed to do so. And if we think about it in the context of AI, how can that support someone convincing another party of their narrative? Is it a combination of imagery? I would argue that a lot of the false news that propagates these days is to some extent social engineering because it appeals to the beliefs that people hold and that they want to see echoed. Even if we think about just moving away from the things that are images or recognizable, just creating narratives, text narratives with AI, you can do such a much better. I mean, how many scam messages have you got and you look at it and immediately you go, this is a scam. Like, they can't spell properly, the grammar's terrible. AI does a good job of that. So if you think about it in that context, and I guess also the macro picture of large language models and the ability to learn from people's behaviors and mannerisms, if you can start to look at the way someone constructs their emails and then use that to construct new emails such that the same language and behaviors and mannerisms, etc., are reproduced, like, that's a really, really valuable thing for an adversary. Equally, if you're the recipient of that, and you have your own AI and you're able to look at how does this person normally communicate, and now suddenly I've had something come through which is a deviation from the norm, well, again, here's how we can use it for the good guys as well. So I think every time we look at how can it be used to do bad things, that there is a counter argument as well about how we can use it for good things.
The thing about social engineering is that anyone can be a target and anyone can get caught out. But knowing what to do if that happens is another crucial part of how individuals and organizations can respond quickly to limit the damage.
They can indeed. And what was great about this story is that the individual realized after they'd given their code away, they thought about it for a while and said, I probably shouldn't have done that. And then what they did, they actually reported it to the security team, who were then quite quick, and they saw that, okay, someone's trying to log in or they have logged in, and they locked the account down. So there wasn't a ton of damage done. But what was really important is that the person realized that something happened and they reported it. And this is something we really need to hammer into organizations, that everyone can make a mistake. Anyone on their best day can make a mistake. I know security professionals with like 50 years of experience, they've fallen victim to these things. It's not something that anyone is immune to naturally. But what we need to do is like make it a no shame culture where people say like, look, I accidentally done this, and they feel free to report it without any repercussions, so that security can then lock it down. They can do the investigation. They can make sure it doesn't go into a full-blown incident that becomes difficult to recover from.
If you're already getting anxious thinking about all the ways attackers could trick you to access vital information, take heart. Javvad says that however fast technology is changing and hackers are evolving, the victim remains human, and we can all feel more empowered with this simple checklist.
When you think about it, when you break it down, whether using deepfakes, AI, or a manual process, the advice I give to people is this communication coming from someone that you are expecting from? Are they asking you to do something that you don't normally do? And the third part is, are they instilling a sense of urgency in you? Or is there an emotional trigger there? Are you getting angry, or are you getting scared or something? And if it meets all three of those criteria, then it doesn't matter what they're using, it's quite likely it's going to be a scam. When you think about educating your workforce, it really boils down to the primary point is, if something doesn't feel right, or you're not sure about it, or you think you've made a mistake, report it.
Once an attack has been detected, the panic might set in. It's crucial for organisations to respond in a way that doesn't cause further damage to people and services. Whilst it's easy to put a foot wrong under pressure, Jessica shared her words of wisdom on how to respond to an attack, starting with clear communication.
I think it's important to have transparency as much as possible. I think when you're in the midst of an attack, it's a very difficult position to be in, because you're trying to make sense of what's happening. You're trying to gather information. You don't necessarily know who is attacking you, how they got in, what they can access. So you're trying to gather information, and you don't want to give out false information. But being as transparent as possible, particularly with customers, making sure that customers hear from you, ideally, before they hear in the media, I think is really important. Having mechanisms in place, and this needs to be established before an attack, having mechanisms in place so that you can communicate with staff, and if you're public facing, with the public, and that you can handle inquiries coming in, I think is really crucial.
Ultimately, communications, PR, and staff relations come into it because cybersecurity is about human behaviour. Jess says that cybersecurity's weakness has been in focusing too much on the technical side alone.
It's a deeply technical field, but it's also a deeply human field. When we think about the life cycle of technology or information, people are central at every stage. There's no such thing as a malicious machine, despite what we might see in the headlines around AI. We're certainly not yet at a point where machines are attacking machines by themselves. There's always a human in the loop, and often cyber criminals are taking advantage of people.
Jess wrote her books, Confident Cybersecurity and Hacked, to empower people to understand cyber threats, help them feel confident online, and to practice secure behaviours. And there are benefits for everyone, except the hackers, in that.
I've seen, throughout the course of my career, I've seen the impact of us not including people in cybersecurity, and I've seen the impact of us scaring people too much with the threat. And this can be, and the research in the psychology of fear backs this up. It shows that if we don't empower people, helping them understand what they can do to stay safe, then people either will avoid technology as much as possible, or they'll think we're overblowing the threat, or they will think, well, you know, it's so bad, what's the point? If we're going to get hacked anyway, and if it's really as scary as they're telling us, then what can I really do to protect myself? Because it's such a huge, big threat. So it's imperative that we do take a more holistic approach to cybersecurity, one which does empower people, one that does really reach people so that we can help them stay safe for themselves, for their families, their communities, organizations, and ultimately for the country level as well.
Thanks to Javvad, Jessica, and Troy for putting some of the scary stories into context. As they all point out, social engineering works because of the human element to it. But that's also our greatest defense, whether that's as an individual on our personal devices, or at work in call centers or on emails, or everyday activities.
So how can you clean up your habits and increase your cyber hygiene for everyone's benefit?
Well, for starters, don't use the same password across every platform. And if multi-factor authentication is available, set it up. Yeah, I know it's an extra hoop to jump through if you just want to check your emails or whatever, but it could be a lot less hassle than the alternative.
Use a password manager and look up authentication apps. Also, don't forget to report spam emails and back up your stuff, photos, documents, and so on. Take it from Javvad.
It makes it so much more difficult for criminals to be successful in attacking you. But also, if they do attack you, you're far more resilient. It doesn't mean your whole world is ended just because someone's broken into your phone.
If you're a business, it's super important to educate your people on their own cyber hygiene. They're your front line after all. You can help them think about how to slow down and detect any potentially dodgy interactions. It's also about creating that culture of no shame, no blame. We are all vulnerable to cyber attacks. That's why they happen so often. But if people aren't afraid to come forward and let the experts tackle it, you could be saving yourself a whole world of trouble.
And if you're looking for support and frameworks to make all of this a lot easier across your business, we're here to help. ISMS.online provides you with the systems, training, and support to confidently conquer the world through your business's information security.
You can take a self-guided tour on the website or get in touch for a chat anytime. We'd love to hear from you. In our next episode, we'll find out what third-party access is. You might not be the only person with the keys to your business. Whether it's through employees or breaches that happened before a merger, join us again for more cyber stories and more support. Thanks for listening.